Okay, it says it started.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight for our community information session to learn more about London's new community improvement plan that is supported through the federal government's Housing Accelerator Fund. My name is Mike McCauley. I'm the manager of community improvement and urban regeneration with the City of London, and I'm joined alongside by our project team. We also have a member from our communications team who will assist in facilitating any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. I'll begin tonight with a land acknowledgement before we get into the presentation. The City of London is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Attawandaron. We honor and respect the history, languages, and cultures of the diverse Indigenous people who call this territory home. The City of London is currently home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people today. As representatives of the people of the City of London, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. Should you have a question, please type it in the chat. If you encounter any technical difficulties, please let us know. A recording of this meeting will be published to the Community Improvement Plan Project Get Involved webpage, which you will be able to find at getinvolved.london.ca. As a commitment to the City of London's Housing Accelerator Fund agreement, the City of London is developing a new community improvement plan to accelerate residential development near transit in London. To accomplish this work, the City of London has retained N. Barry Lyon Consulting as the lead consultant on developing this plan. With us tonight is Nick Michael, partner at NBLC, who will take you through a high-level overview of the completed work to date and discuss some next steps in the Community Improvement Plan framework. After the presentation, we will be available to answer any of your questions. At this time, I will turn it over to Nick to take you through the content.
There we go. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Mike. And hello, everyone. I just want to welcome you all again on this really frigid January evening to be with us today to discuss the development of a community improvement plan designed to encourage high-density residential apartments within walking distance of the city's current and planned rapid transit system, exactly as Mike stated in his introduction. I'll just note that this type of development, it's often referred to as transit-oriented development, which really achieves a lot of different municipal and city building objectives, everything from taking advantage of public investments in transit, as well as reducing car dependency and encouraging mixed use and walkable built forms, along with a long list of other similar benefits. As Mike said, I'm Nick Michael. I'm a partner at the planning and real estate consulting firm, N. Barry Lyon Consulting, or NBLC for short. I'll just note that we're a little bit of a different firm in the urban planning space in that we specialize in the market and financial feasibility of real estate development. So we're definitely more involved in the economics, market analysis, and financial and performer work rather than typical land use planning. And about half of my work is actually with the private sector, helping both developers and nonprofits determine the feasibility of their real estate developments through market and performer work. But the other half of my work is exactly on assignments exactly like this that we're here to talk about today with the public sector. Just given our strong understanding of development economics, we're in a really good position to help municipalities when they're thinking about developing incentive programs or housing policies and other initiatives to encourage targeted housing outcomes. So today we're going to begin with a really brief introduction followed by a review of community improvement plans where I'll give a really quick highlight on what they are, what they can do, how we implement them. And then we'll move forward with a very quick overview of London's policy context that, of course, guides development in the city, as well as a review of the city's market and development context that will provide a little bit more insight around why this CIP is being investigated and certainly the challenges that we're seeking to overcome with its use. We'll then finish off with a little bit of some of the key findings of the work that's been completed to date and where we're headed from here. Of course, also followed by a little bit of a discussion. You can respond to any questions or receive any comments that you might have for us as we begin to develop the CIP over the coming months. So to begin, something that's very great news for the City of London. The city was very fortunate being the first community to be awarded funding through the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund initiative that provides federal funding to, I'm sure you guessed it, accelerate the construction of new market and affordable housing. So this fund, it's really meant to address the significant imbalance between supply and demand that's contributing to the housing crisis, while also addressing some of the more recent macroeconomic challenges that are certainly currently impacting development feasibility. So things like rising construction costs and elevated interest rates that I'll hit on in just a moment. And as you can see on the screen here, there were a number of different objectives that the cities put forward to be supported with the $74 million in funding that was received through the Housing Accelerator Fund. And one of these objectives is encouraging a greater supply of high density residential development within the city's protected major transit station areas, PMTSAs for short, which really are just the areas of the city that will be supported by rapid transit. So these areas include the downtown, as well as the transit corridors and transit villages that are illustrated on the screen here in green, purple, and gray. And to achieve this, exactly as Mike mentioned in the intro, the city's retained MBLC and myself to investigate how a CIP might help encourage this objective, which would again be funded with a portion of the funds that were made available through the Housing Accelerator Fund. And while today we're certainly here to discuss this CIP, the city is, of course, actively advancing other policy and funding initiatives to encourage all of the other great outcomes and goals and objectives that were put forward through their Housing Accelerator Fund application, including the creation directly of new affordable housing. So certainly not all of the city's effort and budget is being allocated to this initiative alone. And in terms of project stages and timelines, so we began this work with a background analysis of relevant policies, the city's residential market, pro forma and feasibility assessments to understand the current market challenges facing the city as a whole, but also transit-oriented development specifically. We also completed a best practice review of other CIPs in Ontario to understand what other communities have done to achieve similar outcomes and objectives. And this background work has only just been completed. We're now beginning consultation efforts with a variety of groups, including developers, nonprofits, city staff, as well as the public. And we're also now beginning to put our heads together and start thinking about the overall design of the CIP and incentive program, which of course is based on the analysis that was prepared in the background review and being further informed by our consultation efforts. So we hope to finish a draft of the CIP over the coming months and take the plan to City Council for approval, ideally with the CIP being implemented later in 2025. So moving on, we're going to begin with just a really quick overview of community improvement plans. And starting with, what is a CIP? Well, a CIP enables municipalities to achieve broad planning and economic objectives by offering financial incentives to attract private investment. And the specific objective of municipalities looking to achieve with their CIP can vary really widely. Like we see communities in Ontario use CIPs to encourage downtown or neighborhood renewal, transit-oriented development, like we're trying to do with this CIP. But we also see a wide variety of other objectives, everything from affordable housing, trying to attempt to attract office investment or just broad employment growth, building renovations and retrofits, brownfield remediation, and many others. And depending on the objectives of a CIP, it can apply to different areas of the city. So for example, if the objective is downtown renewal, of course, the CIP would apply to that municipality's downtown. If the objective is a little bit broader, like the creation of affordable housing, for instance, it might apply to the entire city. And similarly, how a CIP is structured, the types of incentives it offers, the timing of incentives, and other variables can also vary quite widely. We see some communities offer funding through a competitive RFP type process. Others approve applications on a rolling basis, so on a first come, first serve. Others have varying packages of incentives that are available depending on, maybe how an applicant scores relative to established or review criteria. There's really lots of different ways to structure these, which will depend on the goals and objectives of the program, but also the amount of funding that's allocated to it. And to implement a CIP, we're typically going to follow a process similar to the work plan that I just highlighted, where you begin with some background analysis and consultation prior to advancing the formal incentive program, developing the formal bylaw, creating enabling permissions, within a community's official plan, conducting a statutory public meeting, and ultimately seeking council approval to implement the CIP. The community will then implement the incentive program, create application forms and review criteria, but also create a monitoring program to ensure that you're regularly checking in on the program over time, of course, just to make sure that the program is continuing to meet its intended use, and you will make adjustments over time if necessary. As we'll get into in a second, London has already has quite a few CIPs in place and has actually just conducted a detailed review of each of those programs last year with targeted adjustments recommended to council. And when we start to think about incentives, I think it's always really important to understand that incentives don't create demand. If there's no demand for a particular outcome, you can offer all the incentive you want. Nobody's going to build something that they can't sell or lease, of course. Rather, what we tend to see is that incentives are most effective as a means of overcoming financial challenges. So developments that would be met with strong demand if they were built, but are not currently viable, whether that's because development costs are too high or achievable pricing is too low, or some other factor that's influencing the project economics. So we're certainly in an interesting time right now in the housing market where demand for housing remains really high, but overall feasibility is challenged due to high costs, something that I'm going to touch on a little bit later in this presentation. So this is exactly the type of context where we can see incentives having a really powerful and lasting impact. But I think it's also important to understand that CIPs are voluntary. They're voluntary programs. We can't force developers and nonprofits to participate and to build. So from that perspective, we have to make sure that we're designing these programs in consultation with builders and with a strong emphasis placed on pro forma and development economics, of course, just to ensure that we're designing them in a way that's attractive, will result in take up, and ultimately will achieve their goals of seeing more housing built. And I just wanted to highlight that the City of London is certainly no stranger to community improvement plans. Displayed on the screen here, you'll see that London has a number of these CIPs currently active across the city, many of which overlap with the PMTSA geography that would be served by rapid transit and, of course, would be subject to this CIP. So existing CIPs include the downtown, areas south and east of the downtown, and others. City also has CIPs that apply citywide, including an incentive program to encourage affordable housing. These programs all underwent a review last year, as I mentioned, with recommendations made to council about how they can be enhanced to better meet their stated objectives. The CIP under study through this assignment is certainly being designed to complement these existing programs where funding could be stackable, in addition to funding available through senior levels of government. So for instance, it could certainly be possible for a developer to secure funding through the CIP that's under development through this assignment, in addition to funding available through the city's affordable housing CIP, for instance, as well as low-cost financing programs that are currently made available through CMHC. This kind of process of easily stackable incentive programs is certainly a strong best practice that we observed in our case study review of other successful CIPs, but also is just a necessary component to see these types of housing projects get built, based on my experience working with the private sector directly. Moving on to the city's policy context now. We only have one slide here, and really we just wanted to highlight that the city has either implemented or is in the process of implementing several policy and planning adjustments that are meant to reduce development approval timelines, reduce risk and uncertainty in the land entitlement process, expand development opportunities, and ultimately encourage greater and broader housing supply in the city. These initiatives have included things like increasing permitted heights and densities, for instance, or improved efficiency in the development application review, removal of parking minimums, and many others. And I just want to note that some and many of these initiatives were commitments made in the city's Housing Accelerator Fund application, but I just wanted to confirm that this CIP is not further adjusting any city policy or framework guiding development in the city. Rather, this CIP will function within the city's policy context established in the official plan, zoning bylaws, as well as other planning frameworks. Moving on now to the city's market context. So certainly our background review of the market and development feasibility found a number of interesting findings that will inform the design and implementation of the CIP. Starting with the city's population growth profile, We see that the city was growing really quite modestly and predictably between 2004 and 2015, where things then began to accelerate really quite quickly, as you can see on the chart on the screen. But really in 2022 and 2023, the city's growth exploded, growing by over 17,000 people in 2022 and 20,000 people in 2023, really well above the average of less than 5,000 people prior to 2015. And this growth was strongly driven by increased level of international immigration, as well as non-permanent residents, the latter group really primarily comprised of international students. And it's important to understand because these two groups are also strong sources of rental demand as they typically rent homes when they first arrive into a market rather than buy a house. But the city, of course, has also been attracting a greater share of internal migrants from other cities in Ontario, many of whom have been attracted by the relatively affordable, low density, and family size housing options in the City of London, especially when compared to locations within the central GTA. It's kind of out migration of family households living in expensive and small households in the GTA to Southwest Ontario, further east into Kingston, certainly north into Simcoe County. Definitely a well documented trend that accelerated after the COVID-19 pandemic and adoption from work from home and hybrid work policies. And looking to see now how the real estate market responded to this growth, certainly we see that housing starts have also been trending upwards, with the development industry responding quite well to heightened levels of demand by building new housing. Following heightened population growth, we see a spike in home building in both 2021 and 2022, certainly something that we would expect to see. But we also see that housing starts decreased significantly in 2023, which continued into 2024, which is a trend I'm going to revisit in just a moment. We're also seeing more apartments being built in the city than ever before, both in total amounts, but also as a proportion of the city's overall housing profile, with the vast majority of these apartments being rental in tenure as opposed to condominiums. And focusing in on the rental market a little bit, we see that the vacancy rate in the city has been well below balanced conditions of 3 to 5% since at least 2015, aside from 2020, of course, which was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, where this is what we see really across the province, across the country, really, where vacancies were temporarily heightened. And what we see here is that despite the high levels of development that we highlighted on the previous slide, and the high amount of rental apartments and specifically that were built in the city over the past few years, clearly this hasn't matched the significant demand experienced in the city, as vacancy levels have remained low, right, well below 2%. And as a result of this imbalance, with demand far exceeding supply, we're seeing the price of rents increase, with significant increases of over 7% annually since 2019, which of course corresponds with the heightened population growth that I highlighted just a second ago. Likely not a surprise to anyone, but the ownership market in the cities also experienced significant price growth, with the price of homes also beginning to climb sharply around 2019 when the city's population began to increase rapidly. We see even more aggressive price growth aided by continued demand and low interest rates in 2020 and 2021. But then different things started to happen. We started to see the Bank of Canada begin to sharply increase interest rates, which had an immediate impact on home pricing. So the graph on that previous slide was showing pricing trends in the low density and high density markets between 2012 and 2022, with the graph shown on the left here showing what's happened since that time. So the graph on the left shows the Bank of Canada overnight lending rate in yellow, illustrating really how quick and aggressive these rates were increased to battle inflation, as well as to cool speculation in the housing market. It also shows the price of single detached townhomes and condo apartments and how these product types reacted to these changes, with each decreasing in price by around 20% from the peak in 2022 towards 2024. And what this has done is certainly it's cooled market pricing, which I think everyone can agree is generally positive from an affordability perspective. But rising interest rates have also added significant cost to developers who are looking to build and operate new housing. Construction and permanent financing costs have increased substantially as a result, as interest rates have increased. And at the same time, as we're showing on that chart on the right, construction costs have more than doubled since 2017 due to a wide range of factors, with most of this occurring in 2021 as a result of inflation, supply chain interruptions caused by the pandemic, labor shortages, as well as increases in municipal charges and other soft costs. And as a result of these significant cost increases, as well as dampened pricing levels, a little bit on the demand side as well, what we're seeing is that the feasibility of developing new housing has been significantly impacted. We're seeing new development slow considerably, both within London, as we're showing on the chart here, but also broadly across the country, as well as other major markets in the United States and Europe as well. And while this chart stops at 2023, I'll just note that 2024 was not much better. And this is a real clear and pressing challenge for communities across Canada as we seek to accelerate and increase housing construction at a time when feasibility is not strong due to high development costs as well as other macroeconomic factors. Looking now to development patterns across the city, on the left here, we've mapped, that's highlighted in green, where apartments have been built in the city relative to the protected major transit station areas since 2011, which are highlighted in red. And on the right, we have mapped development applications for new apartment buildings. And what we see is that since 2011, only about 20% of all apartments built in the city have been within the PMTSAs, and only about 35% of all development applications are within these geography. And there's a wide range of factors contributing to this trend of apartment developments being attracted to other areas of the city. Everything from land being more expensive and complicated to develop within the PMTSAs, it being more expensive to build in these areas, the need for large underground parking lots, as well as developers owning lands in other areas of the city, and many other factors. So not only are we seeing broad headwinds facing new development, but also additional site-specific challenges within the PMTSA specifically that we must overcome. And that brings us now to some of the identified key directions and next steps. The result of the market and financial analysis suggests that development economics are currently challenged, and these challenges exist despite overwhelming demand and need for additional and broader housing options. Building off these macro level challenges, London PMTSAs have additional site-specific challenges that affect the level of investment occurring within the downtown and the areas serviced by future rapid transit. And ultimately, this CIP is therefore intended to overcome these financial challenges by offering a subsidy that's funded through the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund. And certainly, while we're still in the early stages of program design, we do know that it will offer capital grants to eligible projects that must begin construction before the end of 2026 as required by the fund. We also hope to develop this program over the coming months and bring it to council for further consultation and approval later this year. So that's the end of this brief presentation, and we'll hand it back over to the City of London to facilitate any questions and comments that you might have for us at this time.
Thank you, Nick. I didn't see any questions come in throughout the presentation, though if anyone has a question, please feel free to use the chat function and we'd be happy to answer. Of course, if you have comments as well, we'd be happy to collect those as well. As Nick mentioned, we are currently developing the draft of the Community Improvement Plan and the financial incentive programs. There will be a formal statutory public participation meeting scheduled on March 18th. That is when the Community Improvement Plan is expected to be presented to our Planning and Environment Committee for review. It is scheduled to go to Council on April 1st for final approval. Of course, if you happen to have a question at a later date, we encourage you to reach out through the city's online engagement portal, Get Involved, and you can find that at getinvolved.london.ca. I still don't see any questions. We'll give it a couple minutes. Maybe there might be someone out there itching.
Just to clarify too, Mike, use the Q&A function, not the chat.
Oh.
The Q&A button, in case anyone's confused. Oh, we have one now.
So what are the financial incentives being considered and what addresses affordable units? So I will start with that and I'll pass over to Nick. So we are looking at, as Nick mentioned at the end of the presentation there, capital grants. We are looking at a per unit incentive, per unit grant that will be designed to hopefully try to stimulate some buildings and get some shovels in the ground quicker. As a condition of the Housing Accelerator Fund, as Nick mentioned, we are on a tight timeline to turn this incentive program around. So we are looking at projects that are feasible within the next couple of years. We are looking at a per unit incentive grant. We are not considering specifically affordability at this time. Depending on the number of applications that we receive and the structure of how we look at distributing the funding through the incentive, we may eventually have some sort of rubric or criteria that we would be evaluating applications on. Of course, that would be provided to applicants of the incentive program, where we would have scoring criteria. Within that scoring criteria, we may have the consideration of affordable units being part of those developments. Obviously, the inclusion of affordable units within your development would lead to a higher score in that rubric. I'm not sure if Nick has anything further to add to that answer.
No, that's great, Mike. I completely agree. I think the inclusion of affordable housing as a criteria to prioritize funding should the request for funding exceed the available budget. It's definitely something that we're thinking about. And in terms of groups looking to build affordable housing, we definitely will design this CIP to stack with cities' existing CIPs that are encouraging affordable housing, as well as incentive programs and funding programs from senior levels of government that already exist to encourage groups to build affordable housing. Definitely.
So the question is, can the capital grant be used to address servicing capacity issues? At this point, the capital grant is not being used to address any servicing issues. Under the Housing Accelerator Fund, there has been a number of funds allocated towards addressing servicing capacity issues. This community improvement plan that we're working on is specifically looking at units. So we are looking at building additional residential units within the City of London. So that's where this funding is coming from and what that funding is intended to accomplish. Next question, is this federal program available only if the city hits certain intensification targets? So under our Housing Accelerator funding agreement, the city is in receipt of $74 million. Those are paid over $18 million installments over 4 years. We do have reporting that we do have to report back to the CMHC on. So we do have certain targets within the Housing Accelerator Fund that we have to hit in order to be eligible for the funding. So to partly answer your question, yes, the funding is conditional on us hitting certain intensification targets, but it's not like we're looking at the city globally in terms of certain densities within certain areas. The funding that we have received is tied to specific units that we have applied for within our Housing Accelerator Fund agreement. Good questions. All great questions. Can lands zoned for high density residential development located within PMTSAs be considered eligible for the funding? Absolutely. Absolutely. We are looking, without revealing too much detail, we are looking at how we are constructing the financial incentive programs. They will follow the designated zoned areas of the PMTSAs and the rapid transit lines within the City of London. So while the community improvement plan will be citywide, we will be scoping the financial incentive programs along the City of London's rapid transit areas, corridors. Okay, I don't see anything else coming into the chat right now, or into the Q&A section right now. I will again reiterate, if you happen to think of a question at a later date, by all means, we encourage you to reach out to the City of London's online engagement portal, Get Involved. That's getinvolved.london.ca. And as previously mentioned, there will be a public participation meeting that's scheduled for March 18th, when this community improvement plan will go in front of committee for review. It is ultimately scheduled to be presented to council for final approval on April 1st. So again, we encourage you, if you have any additional questions, please reach out. We're happy to chat further. And this will be my last call for questions. Don't see anything else coming in. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending tonight and listening to some important updates that are coming your way with regards to a new community improvement plan within the City of London. As always, we're happy to hear your feedback, so please feel free to reach out and engage with us. Again, getinvolved.london.ca. I'd like to thank Nick for a great presentation today. Thank you and have a wonderful evening, everyone.